Om Brahmanandam Paramasukhdam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dandvatītam Gagan Sadrisham Tattvamasiyadilakshayam Ekam Nityam Vimlamachalam Sarvadhi Sakshibhutam Bhavatītam Trigunahitam Sadguru Tam Namah. Shivam friends. So today we will take up our reading of chapter 19 onwards of third book, that is Sthiti Khanda, and in the chapter 18 incarnations of the living spirits were discussed, and now in chapter 19 the differences between waking and dreaming states is being described by Vasishtha, and he is saying Brahma is the seed of life and remains as empty air everywhere. Hence, there are many kinds of living beings situated in the world within the womb of universal life. All living beings composed of dense consciousness and soul contain other living animals underneath. Like the manifold layers of the plantain tree and insects contained in the womb of earth. Worms and insects that grow out of the dirt and scum of the earth and water in the hot season and appear filthy to our sights, nevertheless are living beings full of particles of consciousness. However, living beings strive for their progress, so they prosper in their lives according to the different scopes of their thoughts and actions. Those who worship gods go to the region of gods. Those who worship Yaksh, nature spirits, meet in the world of Yaksha. Those who adore Brahma ascend to the world of Brahmlok. Therefore, resort to what is the best and greatest refuge. Shukra, the son of Bhrigu, obtained his liberation at last by the purity of his consciousness. Even though he was enslaved to his own nature, to phenomena, at his first sight of them, the Apsara fairy, a child born on earth first has purity of its soul, then it becomes of the same nature as the education he gets, not otherwise. I think not just the education, but whatever the hidden desires are there in the mind, they also play a very important role in the overall upbringing of the being. Now Ramji said, please sage, tell me the difference between the states of waking and dreaming. What are the states of waking watchfulness, waking dream, and waking delusion? This is very important, I think, and we should all must concentrate on what is being explained here. Vashiji answer. The waking state is that in which we have a sure reliance. Dreaming is the state in which we place no certain reliance and we believe it to be nature or untrue. Dream is something that seems like the waking state but lasts only for a moment. If an object is seen over a length of time and distance, it is said to be a waking dream or dreaming wakefulness. The state of waking dream can be of longer or shorter duration, during which what we see appears the same at all places and times. Dreaming, as long as it lasts, is also like waking. But waking seems like a dream when the objects of its vision are not lasting. A dream that is understood as an occurrence of the waking state is believed to be waking, but inner consciousness of dreaming makes it a dream. As long as one knows anything to be lasting before him, he believes himself to be waking. But no sooner is it lost to him than he thinks himself to have been dreaming. Now, here how it is. There is a principle of life in the body that causes it to live. This vital element is an electric force called life, Ch19. And the body is active with the powers of the mind, speech and other members of the action. Its vital elements is put into motion by the vital breath that it breathes. This breath circulating throughout the body gives it the power of sense and consciousness, which have their seats in the heart and mind, where the false conception of the world is hidden. The mind circulates about the outer world through the passages of sight and other organs and sees within itself the forms of many changing shapes and figures. As long as these forms remain permanent in the mind, it is called the waking state. So far, have I told you about the cause of waking? Now hear me expound on the laws of sleep and dreaming. When the body is weary with the action of its limbs, mind or speech, the living elements becomes still and remains at rest with the calm and quiet soul residing within the body. The internal actions of the body and mind being quieted and the motion of the heart being at rest, the living principle becomes as still as the flame of a lamp unshaken by wind. The vital power ceases to exert itself in the members of the body and ceases to keep consciousness awake. The senses of sight and others do not act upon their organs, nor do they receive sensations from without. Life lies latent in the inner heart, like liquid oil residing in the sesame seed. It lies as dormant in the interior part as cold, within frost and fluidity in clarified butter. The particle of consciousness that has taken the form of life after being purified from its earthly impurity mixes with the internal soul and attains the state of sound sleep, as if lulled to unconsciousness by a cooling breeze. One who feels that his mind to be incapable of passion, who deals unconcernedly with everyone, and who has reached the fourth stage of consciousness, beyond the three states of waking, dreaming, and sleeping, is said to be a dead end in life, Turiyavastha. When the vital principle again comes to action after the enjoyment of its sound sleep, either in this or the other world, it takes the name of living element or mind or self-consciousness. This principle of life, and though sees within itself the ebbs and flows of many worlds, just like a large tree and all its parts and productions are observed to be contained within the seed, when the breeze of the vital breath puts a slight motion to the element of light, it becomes conscious of its self-existence as I am. The motion being accelerated life finds itself flying in the air. When the vital breath is immersed in the fluids of the body, life gets the feeling of humidity in itself, as a flower perceives its own fragrance. When it is assailed by internal bile, that then it has the feeling of its inner heat and sees all outward objects with its melancholy temperament. When it is full of blood, it perceives a fiery redness in itself, like that of a red rock, or like the crimson red of the setting sun in the sky. Whatever one desires to have, he sees the same in himself in his sleep, and this is by the force of the inner vital breath acting upon his mind as it does upon his outward organs. When the organs are not besieged by external objects that disturb the inner senses of the mind indulges itself reflecting upon many things. This is called its dreaming state. But when the organs are besieged by outward objects and the mind is moved by motion of vital breath to their sight and perception, it is called the state of waking. Now, O great-minded Ram, you have learned the inner process of your mind, but there is no reality in it or in this existent world which is subject to the evils of death, desire, and destruction. In chapter 20, Vasishtha is saying that mind is the person, not the body. Now, Ram, I have told you all this in order to explain the nature of the mind to you and for no other reason. Whatever the mind often thinks upon with a strong conviction of its reality, it immediately assumes that form like an iron ball igniting from contact with fire. Therefore, the convictions of being or not being and of receiving or rejecting a thing depend upon the imagination of the mind. They are neither true or untrue, but merely fluctuations of the mind. The mind is the cause of error, and it is the mind which is the farmer of the world. The mind also stretches itself in the form of the universe in its gross state. The mind is called the person which, being brought under control and directed in the right course, produces all prosperity. If the body were the person, how could the high-minded Shukra passes into various forms in his very many transmigrations? Therefore, the mind, which is Chit, is the ruler of the body, which is rendered conscious by it. Whatever form the mind assumes to itself, it undoubtedly becomes the same. So inquire into what is great, devoid of attributes and error, and which is easily attainable by everybody. Be diligent in your inquiry, and you will surely succeed to obtain it. Hence, whatever is seated in the mind, the same comes to pass on to the body. But what is done by the body never affects the mind. Therefore, O fortunate Ram, apply your mind to truth and shun whatever is untrue. Now, in chapter 21, philosophy of the mind creating its own reality and different schools of thoughts are discussed. Now, Ramji is asking, Venerable sage, who is acquainted with the mysteries of all things? I have a great question swelling in my heart like a huge surge of the sea. How is it say that any foulness could attach to the mind and it is situated in the eternal purity of the infinite spirit, unbounded by time and space? Again, as there is nothing, there never was anything, and there never will be anything other than the entity of the Holy One, how and from where could this foulness come in him? Now Ashishji is asking, answering. Well said, Ram. I see that your understanding is approaching the way to your liberation and exhaling the sweetness of the blossoms of the Nandan garden of paradise. I see your understanding is capable of judging both deductively and inductively, and is likely to attain that acme which was gained by the gods Shankar and others. However, it is not yet the proper time and place for you to ask this question. It should be asked when I come to the conclusion of the subject. You should ask this question when I come to the conclusion, and it will be demonstrated to you as clearly as the location of a place on a map placed in the palm of your hand. Your question will be most suitable at the end, just as the sounds of the peacock and swan are best suited to the rainy season and autumn. The blueness of the sky is pleasant to look upon at the end of the rainy weather, but it is odd to speak of it during rain. It is best to investigate into the mind by the nature of its act and operations that tend to be the causes of the repeated births of mankind. The mind by its nature has the power of thinking, and as determined by the seekers of salvation, the mind leads all the organs and body to their several actions. Men learned in scriptures and eloquent in speech have given various names to the mind in different systems of philosophy according to the mind's various respective faculties and different functions and operations in the body. Whatever nature the mind assumes by the fickleness of its thoughts, it receives the same name and nature for itself. Just like the same fleeting air receives from blowing different smells. The mind delights itself with the thoughts of its desired objects and assimilating itself into their natures. It receives the same form in which it delights and which it assumes to itself in its imagination. The body, being subject to the mind, is molded in the same form as the mind, just as wind is perfumed by the fragrance of the flower through which it passes. The inner senses, being excited, actuate the outward organs of sense in their own ways, just as the exciting motion of the winds drives the dust of the earth before their course. Mind exerts its power to make the external organs perform their several functions, just as flying winds drive dust in different directions. Such are the acts of mind, which is said to be the root of action, and these combine together as inseparably as the flower and its fragrance. Whatever nature the mind adopts to itself by its accustomed habit, the same shoots forth in the forms of mind's two kinds of movements, will and action. The mind does its action and brings about the result by its diligent application. In the same way, the mind enjoys the results and enslaves itself to the enjoyment. The mind understands what is its right course, which is whatever agrees with its temperament, and the mind knows for certain that there is no other way to its real good other than its accustomed course. Mind of different castes follow different pursuits according to their particular inclinations. Minds enjoy minds employ themselves in the acquisition of wealth and virtues, desired objects, and liberation according to whatever they think is their best choice. Kapil, the Sankhya philosopher, says the mind is a pure substance like immaterial consciousness, and this view is adopted in their philosophy and scriptures. These men, relying on the error of their own hypothesis, teach their supposed view of the mind to others as the only light to guide them in the way of their salvation. But the teachers of Vedanta doctrines acknowledge the mind as Brahma himself and preach peace and self-control as the only means to attain liberation. The authoritative assertion of Vedanta is that there is no other way to the salvation of the supposed mind, and it is an assumed dogma in other schools also. The Vijnanavada philosopher also have ascertained and upheld peace and self-government as the leaders to liberation, but this too is an expression of their false understandings. Thus, all sects give out their own views in the false rules they have adopted for the salvation of their supposed mind. Each school asserts that there is no other way to salvation except what they lay down. So, Buddhists and other sectarians propose a variety of fictitious methods for the liberation of the mind out of their arbitrary will in their respective scriptures. The arbitrary rules of the learned and those unsupported by the Sthiti scriptures are as numerous and varying from one another as bubbles in a clear water. Mighty Ram, know that the mind is the source of all these rules and methods, just as the sea is the source of every kind of gem. There is no innate sweetness in sugarcane or bitterness in the neem leaf, both of which are sucked by insects. There is no heat or cold inherent in the sun or moon. It is the intrinsic habit of the mind that makes the difference. Thus, those who want to enjoy the unadulterated happiness of their souls should habituate their minds to assimilate themselves to that happy state. And they are sure to have the same. The mind, having fled from the sphere of the phenomenal world, becomes exempt from all its pleasure and pain. Like a young bird with feathers flying in the air by casting off its eggshell and leaving its cage below. O sinless Ram, cherish no fondness for the phenomenal world, which is an unreal illusion full of fear and unholiness stretched out to catch the mind. The wise describe our consciousness of the world as a magic scene, an appearance of ignorance, a mere thought, and the cause and effect of our acts. Know that the delusive mind stretches the visible world before you. Therefore, rub it off from the mind like dirty mud. This visible appearance that naturally appears before you in the form of the world is called a product of ignorance by the wise. Men, being deluded by it, are at a loss to know their real good. Like the blinded eye is incapable of seeing the brightness of the day. Contemplation of objects present phenomena to our view, like trees in the empty sky. Being without thought of objects removes their images from the inner and outer sides. The abstract meditation of the thoughtful yogi weakens the outward impressions, and by dissociating the soul from all external things, keep it steady and calm in itself. The mind, by removing its attention from unreal sights, is inclined to the right view of the things and produces clarity of understanding and a detached tranquility of the soul. The mind that regards neither realities nor unrealities and is unconscious to pleasure and pain feels in itself the delight of its singleness or unity. Application of the mind to unworthy thoughts and to the internal or external sides of things blocks the soul from tasting the sweets of its unity. The mind that is subject to endless desires is like the clear sky hidden by clouds. Such a mind wanders in the maze of doubt between truth and untruth, such as supposing the rope to be the serpent. Man, by the mist of his doubts, obstructs his own sight of the clear sky of his consciousness, but he is unaware of his errors, obstruction, and indulges the fancies of his imagination that adds to his error. He takes the true, incorruptible, and supreme Brahma in a different light. As one mistakes one thing for another in the dark or in his error, when man is rid of his false imagination, he comes to the knowledge of true God and his happiness. Like one freed from his false apprehension of a tiger in a thicket is set to rest, at rest with himself. The imaginary monster of one's imprisonment in the emptiness of the body is dispersed by his sight into it, just as the fear of a lion lurking in the jungle is removed upon finding no such. So when you look deeply, you will find no bondage in the world. The notions that this is the world and this is myself are only errors of the mind. Flight of fancy fills the mind with illusions of good and evil, just as the shade of evening presents apparitions of Betal ghosts to the little children. Our fancies alight on us at one time and depart at another. They assume different forms at will, just like our consorts act the part of wives in our youth and nurses in our old age. She acts the part of a housewife in her management of household affairs, and she is taken as a mistress when she embraces her in her bosom. Like an actress, the mind forgets to display its part when it plays another. So everybody is absorbed in thoughts he has in his head and neglects other thoughts which are absent. The ignorant do not perceive the self same unity in all the things he sees in the world. They see everything in the light of the ideas they have imprinted in their mind. They also meet with results in the forms they have in mind, even though in reality they are not what they seem to be, nor are they entirely false. Man sees everything in the same manner in which he thinks it in himself. If his fancy is an elephant in the sky, he sees elephants in the clouds. In his thought, he believes these elephants are pursuing their mates. So it is the thought that gives the outward forms of things. Ram, repel your drowsiness and behold the supreme soul in your soul. Be like a bright jewel by repelling the shadows of all external things. It is impossible, O Ram, that one so enlightened as you will receive the reflection of the world as dull matter like others do, being certain of its immateriality. Never taint your mind with its outward coloring or the knowledge of its reality, but know the reflection of the world is in no way distinct from the Supreme. Keep in your mind that being who is without beginning or end and meditate on the Spirit in Spirit. Don't let the reflections of your mind stain the pure crystal of your soul. Be on your guard so you never allow the reflections of your mind to taint the clear crystal of your soul. Remain unmindful of phenomena and do not regard any worldly desire. So this is the lesson that Vasishtha gave to Ram in chapter 21. He is continuing in chapter 22 also the qualities of the mind resting in supreme joy. Vasishtha is saying, men of sound judgment are free from mental disturbance and are perfect in their mastery over themselves by restraining the flight of the mind and fastening it to its inner awareness. They swerve from the sight of phenomena as unworthy of their notice. They see knowledge of their chief good. They behold the all seeing God in their mental and external sights and have no perception of unintelligent phenomena. They are dormant amidst the thick gloom of error spreading over the confused paths of life. They are awake under the transcendent light of divine knowledge that requires the vigilance of the living. They are utterly indifferent to the sweet pleasures of this life, as they are also indifferent to the cheerfulness, the cheerless prospects of future enjoyments. They are mixed with the water of a spiritual unity and in the boundless ocean of omnipresence. By their rigorous austerities, resembling the vigorous heat of the sun, they melt away like ice in a river. At the disappearance of their ignorance, all their restless desires and passions are set to rest. Like the turbulent waves of rivers subsides of themselves in the absence of the stormy clouds. The net of desires that ensnares men like birds in traps is cut as under by a spirit of dispassion. Just like the meshes of a net are torn apart by a mouse teeth, as the seeds of cut fruit serve to purify foul water, so philosophy tends to cleanse human nature of its errors. The mind that is free from passions, from worldly connections and contentions, and from dependence on anyone or anything is also liberated from the bonds of ignorance and error, like a bird set free from its cage. When the disturbances of doubts are settled and the wandering of curiosity is over, then the full moon of internal fullness sheds its light over the mind. As the mind's true greatness appears after it sets from the height of its dignity and high mindedness, so it begins to have its equanimity in a state resembling the calm sea after a storm. As long as the shadow of concerns hang over the mind, it is darkened and stupefied and broken in the heart until the sun of renunciation rises to dispel its gloom. The sunshine of consciousness makes the lotus bed of intelligence shine in its pure luster and unfolds the foliage of its virtues before the dawning light above it. Intelligence is charmer of hearts and delighter of all in the world. It is fostered by the quality of goodness, just as the moon becomes full by her increasing digits. What more shall I say on this subject, other than he who knows the knowable has his mind expanded like the sphere of heaven, which has no beginning nor end. The mind, enlightened by reasoning, is as exalted in its nature as to take pity on even the gods Hari, Hara, Brahma, and Indra. The gods, continually seeking to quench their thirst from waters, appearing in the mirage, like the thirsting deer, are far from tasting the happiness of egoistic yogis. Desires in the heart of all beings subject them to repeated births and deaths, causing the ignorant but not the wise to appear and disappear like waves on the sea. The world presents no other show in its course except that of the appearance and disappearance of bodies. Nor are they seen to move about as the sport of time and then fall as a prey to it forever. But the spiritual body is neither born nor dies in this world. It is not affected by the decoration or loss of the material body, but remains unchanged as the emptiness of a pole, both when it exists and when it is broken to pieces. As understanding rises with its cooling moonbeams within us, it dispels the mist of false desires rising before us, like a mirage in a desert. The spectacle of the world presents its dusky appearance to our view only as long as we don't consider the questions, what am I and what are all these about me? He sees rightly, who sees his body as an apparition of his error and the abode of all evils, and that his body doesn't serve the spiritual meditation of his soul and his maker. He sees rightly who sees that this body or his body is the source of all the pain and pleasure which afflict at different times and places, and that the body doesn't answer his purpose of the spiritual edification. He sees rightly who sees the one ego pervading infinite space and time as the source of all accidents and events that constantly take place in them. He knows rightly, who knows the ego to be as minute as a millionth or billionth part of the point of a hair, and pervading the entire infinity of space and eternity of time. He perceives rightly, who perceives the universal soul to permeate all the various objects of his sight and knows them as sparks of the light of consciousness. He perceives rightly, who perceives within himself the omnipotence of the infinite spirit present in all states and conditions of being, and the same consciousness to abide in and preside over all. He understands rightly, who understands by his wisdom that he is not this body or his body that is subject to diseases, dangers, fears, and anxieties, and to the pains and pangs of old age and death. He understands rightly, who understands his soul as stretching above and below and all about him, whose magnitude has no bounds nor equal to it. He knows full well, who sees his soul as a string to which all things are strung like pearls on a necklace, and that it is not the mind or heart that is seated in the brain or bosom. He thinks rightly, who imagines neither himself nor anything else as existent except the imperishable Brahma, and who knows himself as living between reality and unreality. He is right who beholds what they call the three worlds to be the only parts of his self, and that the three worlds have been rolling about him like the waves of the sea. He is wise who looks with pity upon the frail world, and who has compassion for the earth as his younger sister. That great soul, who has withdrawn his mind from the earth, looks brightly upon the earth by repressing his reliance on the interest of his individual ego. He sees the truth, who finds his body and the whole world filled by the colossus figure of consciousness without the opposition of any sensible object. He who looks on the states of misery and happiness that attain worldly life as only the fluctuating conditions of ego has no cause to regret or rejoice at them. He is the right-sighted man who sees himself situated in a world filled with divine spirit. He He has nothing to desire or dislike in this state of existence. He is the discerning man who has weakened his estimation and dislike of what is desirable and disgusting to him in the world, and who sees the world as full of the essence of that being whose nature is beyond comprehension and conception. That man of great soul is a great God whose soul, like the all pervading sky, extends over all and penetrates through every state of existence without receiving the color, dye of any. I bow down to that great soul who has passed beyond the states of light, darkness, and fancy. I bow down to Shiva of transcendental understanding, whose faculties are wholly engrossed in meditation of the eternal being who presides over the creation, destruction, and preservation of the universe, and who is manifest in all the various wonderful and beautiful grandeurs of nature. With this chapter 22 comes to an end, and I think we should rest our today's reading session here. This is completed by the grace of Lord Ram, and hopefully we will get again uh, with the next chapter onwards by tomorrow. Until then, Shivoham friends.